Thank you for joining me on another episode of She Leads Now podcast, where we help career and entrepreneurial women gain the tools to develop a success mindset, create winning strategies, build collaborative relationships, and take bold action towards creating impact and fulfillment in their lives and careers. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I'm on a mission to awaken and activate women and emerging leaders so they can tap into their innate leadership ability, elevate their influence, and create the impact they were destined to make. If you're ready to uplevel your confidence, courage, and influence, you've come to the right place. Join me weekly for insights, strategies, and resources to help you grow, develop, and embody the leader you are meant to be, so that you can make the impact you know you are called to make and establish the legacy you've always dreamed. The world eagerly awaits the emergence of your brilliance, impact, and influence. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of She Leads Now. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I am yet again thrilled, excited, happy, all of the things to be sharing this time with you. As of the recording of this particular series, it is summer of 2023. I know people are out there, they are living life and they are enjoying the sun, they're enjoying family, they're enjoying being able to travel again. So I'm trying to make this summer series, as short as possible, but valuable as well. And so we are in the second installment of the 3M series, Mindfulness, Mindset, and Manifestation. So if you tuned in last week, you heard me share a little bit of the foundational background of what led me on the transformation journey that I've been on for the last 9 months, and some of the initial factors and the initial steps that were at play or that I took, quite frankly, to ignite or to initiate this transformation journey. And so something that I want to share, and I didn't share it in last week, and you'll probably get tired of hearing it from me as the series goes on. Oftentimes when we hear about transformation and we hear about transition, it's very easy for people who make it to the other side to gloss over the ugliness of the journey. And so while I am speaking to you about this transformation journey on the other side, and you probably hear enthusiasm and passion and maybe a little joy in my voice, I know that if you've gone through it, that it isn't always like this every day. And quite frankly, I'm going to be very honest and very transparent throughout this series of those not so pretty moments, those not so great moments, those extremely vulnerable moments that most people don't talk about, but I think are extremely critical, because then when other people are going through it and they start to experience the resistance, they start to experience the doubt, the fear, the anxiety and all that, like they don't believe that they're crazy, or they don't believe that they're on the wrong path, or they don't really believe that they're being punished somehow because the intent was growth, but yet what they're feeling is everything but that. To the extent that I can, I will give you the trigger warnings so that you know when I'm about to go a little personal and a little deep. But I think that I truly believe that I would be doing you a disjustice or injustice. I don't know what the right word is, but you rock with me, that I would be doing you a disservice. There it is. That I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't also tell you about the dark side of growth, the dark side of transformation, and what I particularly experienced, and the tools, the people, the resources, you name it, that I was able to leverage to support me while I was in that space of darkness. I don't have a magic pill or a magic equation to tell you, oh, this is how you skip the darkness altogether. If I did, look, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The darkness is part of the process. And I just hope that, in me sharing my dark moments, that it helps support you, it empowers you. And if you are in a dark moment, that it allows you to know that you're not alone and this is part of the process and you haven't veered off track and that light is coming. So with that, As I mentioned last week, we're doing this 3M series. And for those of you who are listening for the very first time, thank you so much for tuning in. If you missed last week's, go ahead and listen in on the episode. It is a relatively short episode. I'm trying to keep these short, but there's just so much I want to say and I want to share. But I'm also happy if there's something that I miss or that you feel was glossed over and you're not clear how that applies to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can email me at SabineGideon.com and I'll be happy to answer your question. Or if it makes sense, we can hop on a call and I can provide some more clarity. If I learned anything through this process is that vulnerability is everything. And vulnerability starts with me first and then being able to share with others because my heart is really truly to serve others and becoming the best version of themselves. And I don't know a better way to do that than to being vulnerable and transparent and as honest as possible. So with that, today we're going to focus on some of the books that I read. So last week, not to spoil it too much, last week I shared with you that there were a couple things that I incorporated or at the starting of my journey that were game changers. And part of that was the morning routine. And within that morning routine, I started my day 5 a.m. First 3 hours, I poured into myself physically from a mindset perspective, as well as from a spiritual perspective. And I can tell you, I I read more books or listened to more books in this case in the last 9 months than I think I have in the last 3 years. And y'all know I'm a reader. So that should tell you a lot. And if I can be really truly honest and transparent, there were some really dark, scary moments during that transformation and that time of transition where books became my safe space, where because I'm a natural learner, I wanted to understand what was happening. I remember a while back, I was in a transition, nowhere near as deep as this, but I was in a transition and what I was trying to create looked completely different from the reality that I was living. And I remember Holy Spirit or hearing Holy Spirit say that there's a difference between truth and reality. And I remember that serving as such encouragement for me as I was walking through that particular period of darkness. And so when I was experiencing it again, I kept reminding myself that there's a difference between truth and reality. And the way that I was able to separate my reality from the truth, which was I was creating the life that I wanted to live. I was determining what experiences that I wanted to have. I was leaving behind old memories and old experiences that I had just kept recreating and recreating because they were what were programmed in me when I was a kid. And so as I moved through this process, I used books. They became my lifesaver, quite honestly, to help me separate the truth in terms of where I was headed from the reality that I was experiencing, which at times felt hopeless, at times felt dark. I'll share a little bit more of what that looked like with you at some point. So today, I just want to talk about some of the books that were game changers for me through this particular process. We will link them all in the show notes. And this is not all of the books. These are just the top books. There have been so many, and there are so many in my queue left. So just know throughout the series, as I think about books that are relevant to the particular pieces, I will share those. And as we're thinking about it from the mindfulness mindset perspective, which is what those first couple of months were focused on, my coach at the time had us reading several books. So the power of TED, which is TED is an acronym for the empowerment dynamic. This is by David Emerald, Emerald. You could find it on Amazon. That was probably one of the very first books that he had us read that completely blew my mind. It changed my perspective. It forced me to start to look at everything that I was experiencing and everything that I had created up until my life at that point. It forced me and it challenged me and it invited me to take responsibility. And so the empowerment dynamic, before we even get to that, or before the book gets to that, it talks about the Cartman triangle, and you can look that up online, but basically it's this triangle that speaks to the fact that at any given moment, most of us, and I was most of us, walk through life either playing one or three roles. And that's either a victim, a persecutor, or a rescuer. And I remember when I first started reading the book and I was reading the descriptions, I was like, oh yeah, I am totally the rescuer. Like I have savior syndrome. That's the role that I play. And I had evidence of me playing that role at work, in my business, with clients, in past relationships, in my household growing up. I was convinced that I was always the rescuer. I was never the persecutor. And God forbid if I admit to being a victim. By chapter 3, y'all, I was like, oh my gosh, I have such a strong victim orientation. And I won't go into too many of those details here on what birthed it. You will hear it throughout this process of this 3M series. And certainly as I share more in these solo episodes. But what I realized about myself, and up until reading that book, I probably would never admit it to myself, is that I would go into situations as the rescuer. Like I would literally create situations where I had to be the rescuer, or I told myself they needed me, or I had to go above and beyond, only to bring myself to the place where I became the victim. Why? Because I people pleased my way. I overgave, I overcompensated my way to getting to the place of either being resentful that all that I was given was not being recognized or feeling like people were taking advantage of me. And again, hopefully I'm not glossing over this, but I have to tell you, as someone who has actually been victimized as a kid, who has dealt with all types of trauma, big T, little t, and every T in between, I had developed this wall, if you will, or this guard and defense mechanism against ever being considered a victim. It was my way. It was like a self-protection. Yes, I had experienced horrible things and I share them in my book, Transform the Journey to Becoming, but don't you dare call me a victim because I quote unquote overcame and I was strong and blah, 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 and all the things. Yet when I read this book, I was humbled, y'all. Like I cried for days. And I'm telling you, by chapter 3, like my entire life had been changed. It was almost like someone pulled the carpet out or brought in like a big old mirror and was just like, yeah, about that life that you think is so strong. Let me let you in on a little secret. So if you haven't read The Power of Ted yet by David Emerald, I would highly recommend that you do so, understanding, knowing, and going in with an open mind that this is to help you and this is to serve you. And in the areas where you find yourself getting defensive, the areas where you find yourself wanting to discard whatever is in there, I would challenge you, and I'm inviting you to take a moment to even examine, why am I so defensive? Why does this feel so far away from the truth? Because somewhere hidden in there, your mind is probably blocking that. The other beautiful part of this book, and I will share other books, but I won't go into this much detail. But the other part of that book is it tells you, or it walks you through this process of how to move from the victim orientation to the creator orientation. And so it literally allows you to see where you are current state and gives you a roadmap for how to move into the next version of yourself that does not recreate drama or recreate these situations where you are playing one of these roles in the drama triangle, as they call it in the book, to the place where you are creating the life that you want for yourself, that you are showing up the best that you can for others who are in your life. And even when you encounter situations where, you could be the victim or you are being victimized, that you can move into the mindset of, okay, I created the situation. So if I created the situation, there's a reason why I created it and it's serving me in some capacity. And so how can I lean into it to learn from the situation versus whatever your regular defense mechanism is of either shutting down or blaming or whatever it is that we as humans do. So that was the first book that really like, man, that mirror was big and it was clear. It was the clearest. Like they had a special Windex with that one. And it just completely changed my life and set the stage for everything else. So some other books that I read during that time, I reread The Four Agreements. If you had been listening to the show during the previous few quarters, you heard several of the guests name that as a book that was a game changer for them. So The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. One of the other books that my coach at the time assigned was The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles, Wattles. And, you know, this book, obviously, if you've read like a Think and Grow Rich, it's from that era, but it's less about the money and it's more about your mindset and your belief in your capacity to create the life that you want. The book Mindset by Carol Dweck is one that I read, as well as Unblocked by Margaret Lynch Rainier. My God. And I will talk about EFT, which is Emotional Freedom Technique, AKA tapping, at some point during this particular series, because that was another game changer for me. I actually started with a previous book by Margaret called Tapping into Wealth. And that was focused on how to identify emotions that may be keeping us from creating the actual financial resources that we need in our lives or in our businesses. So those are a couple. And then I just have a few more that I want to share because they were just so powerful. So while I was doing a lot of reading as it related to mindset and mindfulness and business growth and all those things, some of the books that really tore me up, for lack of better term, were the books that allowed me to look at what I was seeing back in that big old mirror that was put up. And so a couple of the books that I started off with were The Worthy Project by Meadow DeVore. And Meadow's last name is spelled DeVor. And you can find all of these on Audible or Amazon or wherever you listen to books. This one was big for me. So similar to the Power of Ted book, where I realized my victim orientation, this one took me a foot deeper, where it helped me see how much of my programming, how much of my being, how much of my doing, and even how much of my achieving was built off of the foundation that I didn't believe that I was worthy. And that was worthy of all things, worthy of love, worthy of time, worthy of attention, worthy of being alive. And so this book by Meadow and a few others really, she also has The Worthy Mind. So there's The Worthy Project and then The Worthy Mind. I would say if you're going to read these, start with The Worthy Project because The Worthy Mind was the sequel. But it really opened my eyes to see how much of that programming that was seeded in me from 0 to 7, I had been playing out in different areas of my life. And when I tell you, I have literally been playing out these circumstances for the last, well, I'm 41 now at the time of this recording. So for the last 41 years, because it's all I knew. I learned very early on within my family dynamic that I was not as important as the other kids. And I actually came, and trigger warning here, but I was conceived on the heels of my parents losing a child. Literally, he passed away in my mother's arms while she was on the way to the hospital to get him remedied. So I came into the world on the heel of this devastating loss for someone who already had emotional issues and challenges, who was probably dealing with tremendous grief. And that reflected in our relationship and that reflected in how I was treated. And so I didn't realize that knowing this and having experienced what I experienced with her, that I was programmed to believe that I wasn't worthy. And not only that, but I was programmed to create situations where I was constantly proving to myself and to others that I was actually worthy. So more on that at a later time. So hopefully that gives you some context on the depths that I had to go to for healing. When we hear manifestation, this is more so on the mindfulness and mindset books. But to get to manifestation, it's not just about creating something externally. I'm a true believer now that manifestation in whatever it is that we're trying to create only happens, or I should say, serves as confirmation once we've been healed. Worthy Mind, The Worthy Project, and two other books that really just tore me up. They had me fetal position, ugly crying, drained, where I couldn't do anything the next day. Another book was Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and that is written by Lindsay Gibson. This for me, I had downloaded it maybe quite some time ago and never read it. It was one of those, okay, one day I will read it. But once the unworthiness messages started to come up, and as well as the emotions that were tied to it, the next step was me understanding, okay, what triggered all of this? Like, how does a mother struggle to love her child? It still didn't make sense to me. I was healing, but I also wanted to understand from a place of empathy, from a place of compassion, and also from a place of just releasing me of any guilt for us not having this relationship, this close relationship that everyone tells you you should love your mother and every mother loves their child. Guess what? That's not true. That's not my reality. And that's not the reality of other people. So I wanted to really understand from their perspective, what were some of the triggers that allowed them to project what they did onto me? And then what were some of the messages that I internalized that I now had this opportunity to decide to let go of? So Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, followed by, there was another book, The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. So as all of these emotions started coming up, as you can imagine, for someone who, and maybe you didn't know this, but for someone who was so good about not dealing with emotions, one of my defense mechanisms, just based on the messages in my childhood, were you don't have time for emotions. And quite frankly, as a kid, whenever I would show emotion, I was a very sensitive kid. I'm still a sensitive adult, but I was a really sensitive kid. And when things would happen and I would cry or I would show emotion in any capacity, it resulted in me getting yelled at, verbally abused, hit at times. And so I learned that showing emotion is not a good thing. And when she, as in my mother in particular, was abusive towards me, it didn't matter. It was public in the house, whatever the case may be. The messages that came from my family, and I get it, it was their way of trying to soothe me, but still it was very damaging. The messages that came from my family was like, oh, that's your mother. She loves you. Don't take it personally. And so at 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever age, I don't have the capacity to rationalize and understand that no, she's being mean to me and this is not love. But I internalized it and I developed this belief that love was painful, love was mean. And not only that, if I felt any type of emotion, whether that was sadness, whether that was anger, whether that was anything, then I was in the wrong. And that was a wrong feeling to have. And so again, not knowing all these things, I'm recreating them over and over and over in my life. And so when I read The Language of Emotions, what it did was it gave me permission to step into me and identify, how do I feel? Why do I feel the way that I do? And gave myself permission to even just feel it, whether it was anger, resentment, whatever it was. I had this habit of positive talking away what people did to me, or positive talking away whatever emotion I was feeling, because I simply did not know that it was okay to feel and I didn't know how to feel. And when I did feel, it was either it was a bad emotion, and so we had to put that away, or it was a good emotion. And so we could only sit in that for a few seconds because the next thing had to be done. It was The Language of Emotions, Children of, what was it? Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And then came the tapping books that really helped me step into that place where I could feel my emotions, name my emotions, process my emotions, let go of my emotions, and really truly heal. There are several other books which I will put them in the show notes as well. And then the last real healing book for me is The Complete Conversations with God. It's a 3-part series by Neil Donald Walsh, and that's Walsh. And I could do 5 episodes on this book alone. Book came on the heels of The Power of Ted, and it really transformed my relationship with Christianity. And it did it in a way that left me feeling, for lack of better terms, like alone and naked, but in a good way, because it allowed me to examine everything that I had been taught and everything that I had, all of the messages around Christianity that I had bought into. And it gave me the space to examine all of them and decide for myself what I wanted to believe is true based on my relationship with God. And so this one, I would say, and this is not meant to offend anyone by any chance, by any means, but if you're a super diehard Christian like I was, just be prepared to know that it's going to challenge those beliefs. But just like anything, we get to eat the meat and spit out the bones. I just know that for me, it completely shifted my views and my beliefs and where I am today in terms of my spiritual walk and my relationship with God is completely night and day from where I was before. And yeah, that's where I'll leave that. So those are some of the books that were transformational for me. And as I mentioned, they became part of my morning routine. So in addition to listening to my coach, whatever training he was doing, I was listening to a few chapters of these books, and not just listening to the books, because we can listen and we can zone out. But in many cases, some of these books, I listened the first time. And of course, because it was part of my morning routine, I was in my office, no distractions, no phone, no nothing. I really sat there and I listened. But in some cases, with some of these books, I went back and I listened a second time, because you can never get everything or grasp everything the first time you listen to it. So it was just part of me wherever I was, wherever I felt like I needed healing, a little bit more of it, or understanding. I leveraged these books more than once to help support me. So that's what I have for you today in this 3M series: mindfulness, mindset, and manifestation. This is the beginning of where I would say the mindfulness practice of the first 3 hours began. But this is where we move into mindset, where I was challenged to examine everything that I had believed about myself, about my experience so far, about all of the people that had come into my life, and also what I wanted to create. So hopefully some of these book recommendations are speaking to you and you'll go ahead and grab them. Like I said, we'll include them in the show notes so you can easily grab them from there on Amazon. If you have any books that you have read, whether it's in the last year or whenever, that are applicable or that you want to share, feel free to send me an email. My Audible list is long, but this is a lifelong journey. So I am always down to read and to heal. And I do believe that even if I'm not in that season, that there's the books out there with the wealth of knowledge that they have will help support me when I am in that season. So with that, and speaking of books, as I mentioned last week, I am in the process of finalizing my second book. And again, the name is still TBD, but the book is going to be focused, or I should say a sequel in some senses, to the Lead Her Ship Reloaded series that I released back last year. The release date is scheduled to be sometime mid-September. I will definitely let you know when I have the thumbs up from my team that we're ready to hit that publish button. Pre-orders will start in about a week or so. So I will let you know on the podcast. where you can go ahead and grab that link. And of course, it will be included in the show notes. As I mentioned before, I know it's summertime and I know that people are trying to enjoy their time, but fall is coming and also 2024 is coming. So if you are in a place of transition or you're feeling that tug within yourself and you need some support or you want some support with someone who has been through it and has supported clients through their personal and professional transitions, I would love to come alongside you and help you with that. So I have just about a handful of private coaching spots available. So if you are interested, feel free to send me an email at SabineGideon.com. Whether you're a new subscriber, the first time you're listening to this, or you've been rocking with me since January of 2022, if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Or if, what I've shared, other women, whether it's in your network, your family, in your workplace, whatever, who could benefit from this information, please go ahead and share the podcast episode with them. I'm pretty much on all of the players and all of the directories. So feel free to grab that link and hit the share button. And then, as I mentioned before, if you weren't able to catch the live series that was focused on women and money and helping women heal with their relationship with money. And as you can imagine, part of me releasing that series was actually part of my healing journey with money. So if you didn't catch that live, all of the videos are up on YouTube. So you can just search for my name and you'll find that. And at some point, we will release those videos as part of the podcast as well. So for those of you who are diehard podcast people, be on the lookout for that. And then last thing, of course, if you ever have questions, if you have ahas, or if there are topics that you want me to touch on, like I said before, or like I said last week, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned throughout this process, that it's not just enough for me to go through it and for me to say, oh, I went through this process. The value, the power, the ripple effect that I get to make in sharing what I've learned, what I've experienced with others. So one, they know that they're not alone. Two, they're not crazy. And three, there are strategies and tools to help them get through it. It may not make it super easy, but it's knowing that someone else has gone through it, or knowing that there are tools and resources to help support you through the process, I think makes a big difference. So with that, we will be back next week with the 3M series: mindfulness, mindset, and manifestation. Until then, have a wonderful rest of the week, and I look forward to chatting with you next week. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of She Leads Now. If you found today's episode helpful or got a piece of insight that you plan to implement in your business or organization, I would love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Sabine Gideon, that's my handle, and send me a private message. Or feel free to go ahead and leave a review on either Apple or Spotify. I also invite you to share this episode with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from this content. Lastly, be sure to check the show notes and the description below for links to resources, including relevant downloads, articles, and any upcoming training. Until we chat again, have a blessed and powerful week.